Hello and welcome to another gripping instalment of the Gig Stories podcast. I'm Chris and he is still in Cornwall. Yeah, Alex is enjoying the last couple of days in sunny Cornwall, and as such he doesn't have any access to internet, so we can't do the normal bants that we have at the start and the end of each podcast episode, so you're stuck with me. But I'll keep it mercifully brief. This week's guest is jazz saxophonist Tommy Smith. Now, if you know anything about jazz, you'll know about Tommy Smith, and he's been on the scene since the 80s. We talk about his early days, how he got hooked on playing the saxophone and hooked on jazz in particular. We talk about his practice regime, which was fairly rigorous, even as a young teenager. We talk about his journey from Westerhales, a housing estate just outside Edinburgh, to Berklee School of Music in Boston, and what it was about Berklee that makes it so special as a centre for learning for young jazz musicians. We talk about his first trip to New York, where he ended up playing a gig with Jaco Pastorius, and other various events which happened, which must have been fairly boggling as a mid to late teenager. Yeah, we talk about a load of stuff. Now, with Tommy, you kind of press the button and let him go. So you'll hear more from Tommy than you do from me and Alex. But I think the episode is all the better for that. So anyway, buckle up. Here is Tommy Smith. Hello and welcome to this week's Gig Stories podcast with me, Chris.
And me, Alex. What an episode we have for you today.
No, our guest today is someone I've wanted to get on since we started the podcast, not least because his was my first ever gig on the 9th of June 1989, and probably the reason I took up saxophone. So in 1995, he founded the Scottish National Jazz Orchestra, and our guest today is bandleader, composer, educator, and saxophonist Tommy Smith. Tommy, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Chris, and nice to meet you, Alex, too. So thanks for inviting me on. My pleasure.
No, you're welcome. This gig the first gig, I was looking at it today, the ticket, and because we keep all our tickets, both of us were geeks.
Yes.
And I mentioned in our first ever podcast episode that I was a bit of an early adopter. So on gig tickets it tells you the number of the ticket at the bottom, and my ticket was number 5 that was sold.
You know what gig it was?
It was the Volunteer Hall in Galashiels.
Was that with no piano or guitar? Was that just trumpet?
No, this was Jason Rebello on piano, and there was Clark Tracy and Alec Dankworth.
Right, okay. I remember now.
Yeah.
So Tommy, this is making my night, because on our very first episode, Chris and I spoke about our first gigs, and luckily both of us were brought up in very musical households, and so we both went to quite a lot of classical concerts, and my mum took me to opera, and we said to each other, we've got to make a decision on what our first gig proper was. And mine was Michael Jackson, and Chris said, mine's Tommy Smith. That's going to be my first gig. That is my first gig proper that I chose to go and see and bought tickets. So it's a pleasure, and I've heard so much about you from Chris as well, because what's great for me is this podcast has taught me a lot about jazz. And so speaking to a fan like Dennis Lawson gave me a whole new plethora of artists to listen to, and preparing for this evening as well has opened my eyes even further into jazz. So it's a pleasure to have you on and for you to take time with us. How do we find you? how I know it's been an interesting year for everyone, and I don't want to talk too much about that, but it has sort of forced us all into different places and creatively different things. How are you doing?
How am I doing? I'm doing fine. Obviously, same boat as everybody else. The musician's boat, which has one oar and a few holes in it, but got a big
Yes.
bucket and pouring out the water with everyone else. My last gig before lockdown was March the 7th in Sandvika, which is in Norway, and I was playing a gig with the Scottish National Jazz Orchestra, which is it was a gig that we'd been building up to for ages. It was a version of Peter and the Wolf in Norwegian.
Wow.
So I'd written this version in Scots with the poet Liz Lockhead, and I'd arranged the music and developed it a bit longer. It was about an hour in total, and we produced it in Scotland with Makoto Ozoni on piano, who came from Japan to do it. And lo and behold, we put it out at 7:30 for adults, and the whole place was full of kids, and that kind of scared us because we didn't make it for kids. We made it for adults. But the kids enjoyed it, and we sustained an hour of their attention, which was a miracle. Some of the parents told us afterwards. But we did it in Japan in Japanese, and then that last gig was in Norwegian with a comic actor called Jacob Anderson, who was really great. And of course, I had to have all the different languages in my score so I could cue the band at the right times, phonetically in Japanese because I can't read Japanese, but in Norwegian it's pretty easy to follow.
Yeah.
Lots of words are the same as in Scots and in Japanese. So that was my last gig, and then after that there was nothing. And so what I did is try to catch up on all the work that I hadn't finished, because I'm always so busy I can't do half the stuff that is in my head. So
And is that writing? And do you mean writing your own music?
No, it's everything. It's everything. It's writing, practicing, mixing, recording, building a garage. It's everything that I just can't get around to. So one of the main things was trying to finish a solo project, mix my second Karma record, which I recorded. It was 2015 I recorded that. Still haven't got around to it yet. There's just stuff sitting there. SNGO videos, days and days of footage and recordings. Still, even if I had all the time in the world, I still couldn't get around to all of it. So I was just playing catch up, and because the traveling wasn't there, I was busy as ever. And then I think our first gig was December with SNGO, where we celebrated our 25th anniversary, and we played a kind of collage of music through repertoire and original music to celebrate that. And we did that in Perth. That was a live stream, an actual live stream in the moment, which is pretty difficult to do. It's not a pretend live stream, it's a real live stream. So you got 60 minutes to do it live. It's really, really a challenge, and something I will never do again. But
never say never, Tommy. Never say never.
Well, we need more lockdowns for that to happen, but it's not going to happen on my watch at the moment. So
it's been quite fruitful for you then. It's really you've had a lot to concentrate on, and creatively your juices have continued flowing. Then you've been embraced in that time.
Yeah, we've got the students. You've got education, lessons, sorting out websites and portals for the kids to put their performances on, working out how to engage with them on Zoom, becoming what do you call it? If you're going to work online, then you've got to, as they say, you got to kick ass online. So you don't just like stand there in front of your camera with no light in the dark in a corner with your eyes on the thing. You've got to learn how to do overlays and integrated educational things which engage the viewer. So we had to go and do seminars and learn about a program called Prezi, which allows you to do all this overlaying stuff that links in pictures and videos and text, And so that was great. And then also to be able to invite lots of guests to do master classes, with some help from my youth orchestra's funding and the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, we put our money together and got all these great guests who would never have normally, presented a master class in person because of the flying and the hotels and all that stuff. So we had a great run there. We just finished our 8th, and a whole wide spectrum of people from an Arabic bi-musical performer who plays equally solid in jazz as he does in Turkish folk music. And we had Jasmine Horn, Kurt Elling, we had scholars, we had the critic Stuart Nicholson talking about globalization and localization, which is very interesting. We've had promoters, festival directors. Our next one is an agent, and so the students are getting, a bit of every kind of thing around the business.
Do you think this will change going forward? Do you think from a student's point of view, do you think there will be more of these things, which, as you say, the students have been lucky considering the circumstance. They've been lucky. They've had, such experts doing that. Do you think that will continue perhaps?
It maybe, but I don't think they feel lucky at all. They feel not lucky. I mean, they want to get in, they want to play, they want to engage, they want to hang out. They don't want to sit in front of the screen. They're lucky that they've seen these, videos and engaged and asked questions and all that. But I don't think they see it as a big deal. They just want to get back and play, and because they're young, they feel like they should. And so hopefully soon, when the hugging all begins, we can, when the government says we can do this and do that, maybe we can get back in the same room. But when you've got lots of wind players and trombonists and trumpet, spitting all over the room, it's a bit difficult to do that in small jazz rooms, with no windows. So we'll get there. It'll take time. We just need to vaccinate the entire planet, not just the rich nations, or we'll never get rid of it.
Absolutely. Well, Tommy, so this podcast is all about the live music experience, and I suppose we should really just take you back to being a kid and what you remember of gigs and music as a kid. When were you first aware of, I suppose, just music in general, really? Was there a lot of music around the house when you were growing up?
Probably, but I probably didn't notice it. I remember when I was 9, I had a sore shoulder I went to a primary school in Wester Hales called Dumbriden. Dumbriden, Dumbriden, all that.
Yeah.
And the teacher felt sorry for me and sent me to music. Oh, this kid's got a sore shudder. Send him to music. So I went down and they gave me a recorder. And, I wasn't interested in the least. I obviously learned what I had to learn, but I was really interested in art. I wanted to be an artist. I loved drawing and mostly drawing. I didn't think I had any paints, but I loved drawing. And then I got a brass instrument as well. They put me in a brass trio, and my lip or the person teaching me was so poor they couldn't teach me a technique to play high on the range on the trumpet, so they kept on demoting me to bigger and bigger instruments, thinking, well, if he plays low, give him a low instrument. I ended up carting this big thing to school, and I wasn't interested in that kind of music. So at primary school, not in the least. I loved art, and I loved one of my hobbies was like walking on fences. So I love to walk on fences, like really high, or walk across a bridge, across a motorway on the side of the railing. I would daredevil myself a lot. That's what I was kind of up to.
What?
Yeah, that's what you do in schemes, or you do two-man hunt, but you're not just doing it in a small area. You do it over the entire scheme using all the scrapers and everything, and you're running and fearful of your life.
No, it sounds like you were a fearless child, Tommy.
Well, I was just same as everybody else. You don't know you're impoverished until someone tells you when you're older. So you're happy as a pig in muck and not bothered about it, you know. But my dad, my stepfather, he had a drum kit and he loved jazz, and he would play at weekends some records. And that's the first time I saw a picture of the saxophone. It was on a record by Stan Getz called Andy. I actually have it here because my father and mother-in-law, they framed it for me and gave it to my birthday many years ago. So that's the first album there, and it's actually got an alto on the cover, but Stan Getz doesn't play the alto.
He's a tenor player.
So I love the shape and I love the shininess of it all. And in Wester Hailes, where I lived, all the schools got a music test. Every individual. It was called the Music Bentley test. And so you were stuck in a room, and the music instructor from WEC would come around and say, okay, which note is higher or lower than the other? Or does this match this? And, you know, a whole bunch of questions. And at the top of the page, you were to write what instrument you would like to play. And I wrote tenor saxophone. And probably just because my dad kept on going on about, "Hi, this tenor guy, Ken, this tenor guy is really good. You know, Coleman Hawkins, Stan Getz, these tenor guys, tenor saxophone." And it was kind of implanted in my brain. And lo and behold, when I went to WEC, they had 2 tenor saxophones, and I got presented with one because I put down that instrument. And I went home and I showed my dad, and he goes, "Look, here you go. Tenor saxophone. What do you do now?"
Would that have been at the sort of age of 12?
Yeah, it was just when you go into high school, exactly at 12. And I didn't know anything about the instrument. I just, I was shown how to put it together, put the reed on, and that was it. And then there was a book inside the case called Tune a Day.
Tune a Day. I had that for my violin.
Yeah, well.
Tune a Day.
It's a great book to have because it shows you all the fingerings for all the notes, the chromatic scale. Right, so that's what I learned first, was a chromatic scale all the way from the bottom to the top. So, you know, you're going to work something, you got to know what all these are. So I worked it out, and then I went to work, and that was to copy what I heard on this record, actually, on And the Angels Swing, it was called. And what was interesting is that some of the phrases which were a bit fast, I couldn't hear them, and I didn't know anything about music really. I had absolutely no clue how to read, no chords, nothing. I probably had seen some music from the brass stuff and that, but I probably was winging it. You know, I was just winging it.
Were you not having a lesson in school with the saxophone?
Not well. I went straight home and I started practicing and learning the chromatic scale before, you know. So my teacher was a clarinet teacher, a guy called Jim O'Malley, and he didn't play the saxophone. And he always told me later that he was one page ahead of me in the book because he didn't know how to play this. So,
well, I have to say, my saxophone teacher in school, she was a bassoonist. So I think she was probably the same as Mr. O'Malley there, kind of, you know, right, need to be one step ahead. But yeah, she played the bassoon. So
did you learn a double lip embouchure then?
No, I think she just kept on top of it. I mean, I had started with another guy. He left, a guy called Charlie Mains. He moved up to Dundee, I think Dundee, but only just as I'd started. I started on the tenor, but I just felt like it was too big, so I ended up getting an alto. Yeah, but I mean, you were into Stan Getz and Coleman Hawkins, and I was into Paul Desmond and Cannonball Adderley. So I was kind of, I knew what I wanted to go for. I'm nothing like them, but.
So, is there a time as a 12-year-old and growing up, Tommy? Is there a time that you can point to and say, that is the moment that I fell in love with the instrument and thought, I want to do this for a long, long time. You know, I played the violin from the age of 5 and just never really, I played it for years and years, right through high school. And secretly, I always wanted to play the drums, but we couldn't afford the drums at home. So I just had a violin. So I never really fell in love with playing the violin. I always loved the sound of it and used to love going to concerts with my mum and listening to, you know, violinists. Was there a moment or short period of time where you know, I fell in love with this instrument and this is what I wanted to do?
Yeah, I would think there is. I do remember learning these solos step by step, and some of the fast lines I'd have to put a plate on the record with a stone on it to take it down an octave. I had to find the right size stone. It was heavy enough to go down. Oh, I'm serious. And then I would learn it by rote. So I'd learn the notes and the phrasing and the vibrato, all the kind of nuances and the rhythm and the swing and all that. And then my dad and my mum, they'd make me play for friends. But I was a very nervous kid, very shy, and I could never do it in front of people. So I'd always have to go behind the couch and play, put on the record, and I'd play behind the couch. And it wasn't just that record, it was like a whole bunch of Glenn Miller. They played, and I'd play all the tunes and the solos, and then some Coleman Hawkins. I remember a tune called Blue Room. I'd play that and play the solo, but all behind the couch. And it wasn't until my dad used to go to this Dixieland band, Edinburgh Festival Jazz Band on a Sunday, and he decided to take me along when I was 12. And I'd only been playing for a short length of time, but I really was into it. I mean, I'd practice pretty much. I'd go to school, there'd be a break, I'd practice for the 15 minutes, there'd be lunch, I'd eat, I'd go and practice in the school music department. After school, I'd go home and I'd practice until 9 every day, except at the weekends where practice. And so by the time I'd been playing for 6 months or so, I'd learned, I really got into learning stuff. So I learned a couple of blues solos. Like I could play 2 choruses of a blues with no idea what a blues was or any chord scales, but I'd remember the entire solo. And so my dad, he took me to this hotel. It's called the Barnton Hotel, and he asked the band if I could sit in. So I went, and I was terrified because I'd never played in front of people, and my stomach was churning, and the endorphins were going through the roof, and butterflies were, you know, turning into vampire bats in my and so I went and played, and I played the 2 choruses that I knew, and they thought I was improvising, right? So I got a big round of applause.
Amazing.
And I was like, oh, so this is what it's about. And then they said, do you want to play another song? And I went, okay, what do you know? I said, well, I know I Got Rhythm. So I played the melody of I Got Rhythm, and then they kind of pointed to me to solo. I had no idea why they were pointing at me. So at that point, I learned there's something else to learn, and it's called improvisation. So that was quite funny. But, you know, those were the days where, you know, it was really smoky, and you know, I think the drummer he had a white drum kit, but it was kind of nicotine color after all those Sundays.
Yeah.
And he played. But so that kind of went on, and then my dad took me to a jazz school when I was 13, and I met there Gordon Cruikshank, who was a very influential saxophone player in Edinburgh, and he was head of the Saturday program. And I remember very clearly, you know, we're standing at the Carlton studio, and there's a bar there. I mean, it's closed. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, and we're peering down at a bit of paper, and he says to me, "Do you ken what a chord is? Do you know what a chord is?" And I'm going, is it a pair of trousers? I had no idea what he was talking about. A chord. And he goes, no, a chord is built up like this. And he started writing these notes of a dominant seventh chord, and I was like, oh, okay. And then he recommended a book called Improvising Jazz by Jerry Coker, and I have it on my shelf here. But that's a book that really taught me everything: the fundamentals of harmony, thematic development, chord scales, analysis of stuff, and all that. And it was really integral to very quick growth. And but at the school, I managed to hook up with some other players, a drummer called John Ray, and a piano player called Vincenzo Crucioli, who was much older. He was an adult at the course. He was about 45. He played piano, and he had a car, right? And so we used to go to his house the day afterwards. So we'd have the jazz school on the Saturday, and we'd learn the next song and do the ensembles and that. And the songs weren't easy; they were really good. You know, "Yesterdays" by Jerome Kern. I remember was a really difficult song. I went through so many keys; I had to work hard on that. But on Sundays, we would go and play at Vincenzo's house for the entire day until night, and he visually showed me how a scale fits a chord. So he'd play the chord E minor 7 flat 5, and he'd play the scale, and he'd say, well, you can use this one, which is Loughran, or you can use Loughran sharp 2, and he would show me. And because I saw it visually, it like made complete sense. And so at the age of 13, my concept of how things worked was coming into shape. And so we were really playing all the time. We had a repertoire, and we had no gigs. So we entered a competition at the Edinburgh Jazz Festival, and I was 14 at that time. And we won the best band, and I got the best soloist, and we got all these write-ups in the newspaper. So Vincenzo and I, we went around all the bars in Edinburgh that played music with our write-ups to prove that we could play. And we got a gig on a Tuesday in a place called Le Grand Nuit, the Frog on Abercrombie Place, and then another gig on Wednesdays at the Halt, at the not the Halt bar, that's in Glasgow. It's a bar in Cannon Mills. I can't remember what it's called, but we'd play there every week, and so that was Tuesday and Wednesday sorted out. We'd stay at Vincenzo's on Tuesday night because we had the gig the next day. We'd miss school on the Wednesday, practice, and then we picked up gigs here and there. So he was playing like all the time in different towns, and Glasgow, I met up with some people there. I was playing there, and having to go and play, take the train back. And because I lived in Westerly Hills, the bus never went to Westerly Hills. So I had to get a train at 11:30, get to Edinburgh at 12:30, get a bus to Longstone, and then walk half an hour in the dark through all these schemes with the saxophone. And that would, then I have to go to school the next day. So that's why I've got big shoulders carrying that box.
Did you realize at the time that none of that was normal? And by that, I mean, you, in 2 years, you went from having this instrument to being able to play and gig. I was going to say with adults, but that it doesn't matter who with. Did you realize that's not normal?
No, because nobody tells you that you're impoverished until you're older. And now you're telling me now, and on reflection, yeah, that was pretty screwed up, wasn't it? Yeah.
To be able to do that in 2 years, for me, I don't know if it's nature, if it's serendipity, but
no, it's just determination and practice. I mean, if you've got nothing else to do, then and you've got focus and you've got a mathematical mind, I guess I might have had that from my real father. It's pretty easy if you're, kind of dogmatic about where you want to go. And like, to answer your question I was trying to get to that point, but it was taking a long time. So at the age of 14, after we had won this competition, there was a summer. And I remember during that summer, I'd practice every day, like all day. And that's when it clicked for me in my mind, all the because I'd learned all the scales and every key and all the harmonies, all the usual stuff, and it just really clicked. There was no bar lines for me or brick walls between this and that, and that's when I took a really big leap at that point. And I remember that really clearly because it became easier to play. Up to that point, it was really tough,
Right.
very challenging, very difficult to feel the time, know where you are in the form. Concentration was all over the place. But then I remember that time, it was just like a click. And my dad had taken me to see a few concerts. And my first one was the Buddy Rich Big Band as a kid,
Wow.
probably about 12 in the Playhouse. And I was sitting in the front row or the second row. And I remember the power when they started to play. It almost blew a hole in my chest. It was like,
Yeah.
big band started to play. I was like this.
Well, I was going to ask you that because obviously, once you got the sax and you were doing loads of practice and then lots of rehearsing and then lots of gigging, were the gigs that you were going to at that point? Were you going to lots of gigs around about the same time as well? So that was all feeding in at the same time as well.
Yeah, I'd always sit in the front row. And I'd go to the Queen's Hall. I'd go by myself, 13 years old, 14 years old. I'd sit right in the front row. I'd go and see George Coleman, and Wynton Marsalis, and Illinois Jacquet.
Oh, wow.
All the usual UK bands that would come up. The guy with the hat, he looks like he's a hunter. Hannibal Peterson or Hannibal the Cannibal. Hannibal somebody. Trumpet player.
So
really
would your mum or your stepdad just drop you off?
No, I'd take the bus, number 33. I'd walk down to the bus, I'd get the bus, and I'd go and go to the gig, the Queen's Hall. So it would actually pass the gig. It would take about an hour or something, but I'd go there. And I'd sit in the front row, right in the front, and I'd look at their hands and what they were doing. And so Archie Shepp, watch Illinois Jacquet play around midnight on the bassoon.
Wow.
Archie Shepp's band would come out, they'd play Giant Steps for like 15 minutes and he wouldn't even be on stage yet. And then he'd walk out with his hat on and he'd play. And then I'd watch Wynton Marsalis of Brantford and Hayne and Kenny Kirkland and Robert Hurst III. And, you know, all these gigs just go in and just totally be inspired, go away and, you know, and I'd always go up and get their, can you give me your autograph, you know, like a real groupie.
See, Alex, you know, I was saying that the Barrowlands was my favourite venue, but I probably learned more going to the Queen's Hall in Edinburgh than anywhere else. And I was the same, Tommy. I was going kind of early 90s. It was when Assembly Direct were doing loads of stuff, and probably similar to when you were my age at that time. So McCoy Tyner was coming across, and
big band.
I think he just played solo.
Solo, right? Great.
Yeah, he just played solo. Brian Kellogg supported him, but you know, John Ray Collective a lot, and Andy Shepherd and Steve Swallow and Carla Bley playing, and just kind of blew my mind because I was only hearing it once a week on Humphrey Littleton's show. And that was my fix, and then I would go out and maybe buy a record or whatever. But that was the only real chance that I got to see live music. So yeah, Queen's Hall had a massive part to play.
So
Great
Tommy,
venue.
you've had such a concentrated 2 or 3 years there. Was it all jazz? Or was there a moment where
Nothing else? Nothing. No classical,
really?
no folk, no rock, no pop. Pure jazz. 100%.
And has that lasted through your life as well?
No. Of course, I've had to listen to other forms of music because I'm interested in them. But in my household, there was two kinds of music. There was my mum's music and my stepfather's music. And my stepfather's music was Sinatra, Gene Krupa.
Do you say Gene Krupa?
Gene Krupa, yeah.
Yes, brilliant.
Jerry Mulligan. Fletcher Henderson.
Yeah.
Dizzy Gillespie Big Band.
Wow.
Lee Konitz.
Oh, I've got that one.
Gene Krupa.
Yeah.
Krupa here.
To the listener, Tommy's actually shown us these albums, and they're all original vinyls as well.
and they're tiny little ones. You know, they're these small 45s. Poor game best of Miles
Oh,
Davis.
nice.
Wow.
Lionel Hampton.
That
And
is
you
an
know, one
amazing
of the
collection.
first records that it was a big record, LP, a long player, was Stan Getz A Go Go, and on that record was Gary Burton. And I used to
Wow.
learn Stan Getz his playing. I was a big fan, and I didn't realize that at the age of 13, 14, listening to that record, that I'd be playing with a guy on the record when I was 18. So
Yeah.
that was a really weird kind of thing to think, you know. I wasn't really listening to the vibes, I was listening to the saxophone.
Yes.
So when did Berklee happen for you then? What age were you then?
I was 16, although I applied when I was 15. I saw the brochure in a friend's house. It was actually John Ray's dad, Ronnie Ray. They had the brochure on the table. And
He's a bassist, isn't he?
Yeah, Ronnie's bassist. And
And Tommy, can you explain Berklee for any of our listeners who are not aware? Can you explain exactly what that is, please?
So, I was looking through this brochure, and it had this curriculum which is really extensive. And I never really read books when I was a kid. I read the jazz book, Improvising Jazz, and anything to do with jazz, but I didn't read anything else. It was all music. And so I was looking through this book, and there's pictures of all my heroes who were actually doing master classes at the school, or there was a class on them. And I got totally excited about this place. I was like, I have to go here. And so I applied. I just did a radio show for BBC called Take the Jazz Train with my quintet. By then I'd added a guitar player, and we played some Coltrane and Benny Golson and some Bill Evans, I remember. So I sent the tape in an application to Berklee. And while I was waiting, I remember getting a phone call from a guy called Dave Pringle, who was a TV producer. And, you know, we had a phone, believe it or not, in Wester Hills, and hot and cold water sometimes. And the guy came on the phone and said, "Hey, would you like to play a tune on our TV show?" And I went, "Sure. Who am I playing with?" And they said, "Well, you're going to play with a Danish bass player called Niels Henning Oster Pedersen, a Norwegian drummer called Jon Christensen, English, Flemish guitarist Philip Katrine, and an English piano player Gordon Beck." And I went, fantastic, because I knew most of those players. And I went to the studio, which is in north of Leith Walk, called the Gateway. And they had told me I was going to get £75 for this one tune. And for me, I was playing on a Tuesday, I got £5, and on a Wednesday, I got £8. And the band, we all got the same money, and I would use that money for bus fares, for saxophone reads, and for albums. And so when he said that kind of money, I was like, my God, this is like a gold mine. I can buy so many more records and so many more reads, you know? So I went to the studio, and I went in, and I heard the saxophone player playing, and I was just like unbelievable player. I was like, wow, who's that? So I went up to this guy. He's much taller than me, and my mum had got me a secondhand jacket to wear on the show, because I never had any, you know, jacket, never wore a jacket. And so I had this really strange thing on, and I went up to him and said, "Hi, who are you?" And he looked down and he said, "Hi, my name is Michael Brecker." And I went, "Michael Brecker, so great to meet you." And I'd never heard of Michael Brecker. And so he heard me play. I chose to play a ballad. I didn't chose to play a fast tune like most young kids would play a fast tune and show their chops and all that stuff. I chose to play a ballad to see if I could show my sound and phrasing and emotion and all that. So I chose Autumn in New York. And then I got to sit in the front row with no audience, because it was televised just for TV. and hear Michael Brecker play Olio and Take a Walk and Jarrett's Chorale. And
Wow.
I was just like, I've never heard anybody play like that before. And so that was like, wow. So I took his autograph and his address, and we became friends and started writing. And I would send him stuff, and he's such a nice guy, really beautiful gentleman. And but there were other people that would come there. There was Toot Steelman, there was Kenny Wheeler, Harold Anderson's group, and nobody in Edinburgh saw them. It was all hush hush for TV, and it went out on TV, and it was a shame there was no audience, because I mean, come on, all these people come to Edinburgh, and nobody sees the live music. I was in retrospect, I was really shocked, but obviously at the time, I was very happy to be involved. And anyway, I got a letter back from Berklee, and he said, we're going to give you a scholarship because we listened to your tape, and a scholarship, a Phil Woods Award, and this is how much you have left to pay. And I was like, what? I can't afford any of that, So my music teacher, I actually had gone to another school from Wester Hills for a short period. I went to Broughton High School because they had a music unit, which meant I could drop some school subjects and concentrate on music. But it was a classical place, and so I dropped subjects, sure, but then I had to play classical piano, flute, clarinet, sing in the choir. You got to be kidding me! I'm a young jazz guy. I don't want to learn any of that. So I get this letter from Berklee, and they just look at it and kind of sniff in the wind and can't help me one teeny weeny bit. No heart, no soul, just oh well, blah blah blah. So I left. I mean, I took up sticks and I said, I'm leaving this joint and I'm going back to Wester Hills. So I did. I went back to the other school, and I went to my music teacher, Gene Allison, and said, look, I need to try and raise some money somehow. So we started to write letters. And when I was a kid, obviously I wanted to be an artist, and I'd really beautiful handwriting, but I was really bad at English. I mean, I didn't know how to spell or punctuate, or because I never read any books, but I could copy really well. So I had this gorgeous handwriting, but it didn't make any sense. So the teacher wrote the letter for me, and I copied it out and I signed it, and we made copies and we sent it to Sean Connery's International Education Trust, and we got £1,000 from that foundation. And we got £1,000 from Radio Forth, and my community. My primary school did a sponsored silence for 3 hours. I mean, imagine a primary school not speaking for 3 hours.
That is amazing.
So they raised like 600 quid.
Wow.
All my neighbors would put their hand in their pocket, 20 pence here, £5 there, £10 there. And there was a couple of concerts in Glasgow and in Edinburgh, and it kind of started growing, and we got to 6,500 quid. And so it wasn't until I was 16 that I got to go to Berklee. But before I went, I managed to make 2 albums, believe it or not. So I experienced my first engagement with a record company, which was called GFM Records. The guy had heard me playing in a vegetarian restaurant in Edinburgh, in Glasgow, I remember, called Hallaby's. I was headhunted by a guy called Bill Kyle, who was the drummer, and he asked me to be in his band New York Jazz. We would tour all over the UK and play with these New Yorkers, and we were playing in this place, and this guy comes up to me, hey man, I want to sign you to my label and whatever. And I was 15 years old at the time, and so I got the contract, and the piano player in the band was a lawyer, believe it or not. I showed him this contract, and the first thing he said to me, do not sign this contract. Like, really? So I didn't sign it. Apparently it was to tie me down for 5 years. There was like no deal, no what they call remuneration.
What a surprise.
So I did the record, and the guy stole my publishing for my original composition. I was very much into writing music, So I wrote a tune on that one, and I never got paid, not a penny. And so that was my first engagement with, the thieves in the record industry. So that was the first record. And I did another record that year with Bill Kyle and his band, but we were all friends and nobody was getting paid, and we're all doing it just to get something out there. But those records were really instrumental in getting my name out there throughout the UK, because I recorded trio with no piano or guitar, so it was pretty avant-garde for a kid to not use a harmonic instrument, and the arrangements were quite slick. I mean, I was just basically just blowing my head off every time I played. Although when I played Carolina in the morning, it was very soft and sensual and beyond my years. They say the people who were criticizing it, although a lot of critics can't tell the difference between me and Lovano or whoever. They'll hear two saxophone players and they go, well, Smith's one of them. If you can't tell who's who, how can you be a critic?
Were you finding that there was quite a few people coming to see you play live because they were intrigued by seeing a 15, 16-year-old?
I have no idea.
Were you aware of that being a sort of thing?
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, I know that we tried to record every gig we did, and we listened back that evening to hear what we did, to see if we could learn not to do that again or learn from it.
Listen back straight away?
Oh yeah, that night. Absolutely.
Wow. Listen
back straight away. So listen to the whole gig and listen to the evolution of the solos, the interplay, the whole thing. And that is a big thing to do. You don't just play and think, well, that was great. You got to listen to the evidence. You can't just go on a dream world and think you're good when you're by listening to. I've got all these tapes. I mean, from playing in these things.
You've kept them all.
I've got them all. They're all like over there.
And is that an excuse me if this is an ignorant question, is that something that you still occasionally do, or all the time?
No, I did it today. Yeah, I do it.
You listen back to a live performance you played, and you're listening for where you.
Well, I recorded myself today. You've got to do it. You have to do it to check things, because being a saxophone player is being like a sports. It's like being an athlete, and you have to train for certain events, and you have to train different ways. Brilliant. So when I have something coming up, I got to really look at what exactly is needed, and I got to work in that direction. And I've got to experiment. I got to check everything. So it's all the fundamentals. It's sound, intonation, vibrato, technique, and all that stuff. But I practice a lot of fundamentals because my whole concept of improvisation, which comes from Gary Burton, is very different from a lot of players. So I don't focus on stuff that other people would. I focus on the basics, the fundamentals, because I don't want to play thousands of cliches. That's not improvisation. That's just exerting something you already know. That's not fun. That's not interplay. Not magic. Anyway, to get back to your earlier question about Berklee, I still haven't answered it, and it's still here. You have to
loving this.
About Berklee. So Berklee, when I finally got there, 16 years old, I had my duffel coat, I had my tenor, which was in a red rhino bag. I had a soprano, which I bought for £30, and apparently this cat had pissed in the case when I bought it, so I had to wash the whole thing in the bath with soapy water. I remember having the soprano, washing the whole thing because it was it was stinking like you can't believe. And I had a flute, like a cheap 10-pound flute with the pads falling out and stuff. And my saxophone wasn't, it was pretty well practiced. I mean, I used to play the school saxophone, which is called a Carlton, and I called it the Carton because things would fall off it. So the neck thing would jump off, and the F sharp key would fly off on a gig. Brilliant. And I'd have to use tape to tape up the hole. And so when I went to Berklee, I had those three instruments in my one suitcase and my duffel coat, and I arrived in the dead of winter. And I remember getting this taxi ride, the guys swerve all around the road, a big black guy smoking a cigar, and hey, where are you off to? And I was just like, was I watching the TV show? And got to Berklee, didn't know anybody, didn't know anything, and basically I had to sleep the first night. I was staying in the dorms, which were basically part of the school. So you had the whole school infrastructure, all the classes and the labs and ensembles. And then above you had the dormitories, like 6 floors of dorms. So I didn't need to go out to get to school. So I went up to my room 206, and there was no blankets or pillow. They give you your sheets once a week, like in prison. And so I had a pillowcase and 2 sheets, but I had no pillow and I had no blanket.
Brilliant.
You got to bring your own or buy your own. So I slept that first night, stuffing my clothes into the pillowcase and my duffel coat, just like freezing away. And the next day I went out and tried to find some cheap blanket and a pillow. But at Berklee, the very first week you have to audition. So I remember the audition very well because we had one of the best saxophone players on the planet. He was in the panel, a guy called George Garzone. So he was on the panel with 2 other guys, and I came in, and I'd already been around the building, and I mean, they cater for many students, so about 2,000 students, 500 teachers, massive place, and the level is very high. And I remember going around these practice rooms listening to saxophone players practice, and I was just like gasping at the little window on the door going, oh my God, how can they play like that, you know? And just like freaking out, you know, just like getting really excited. So I went to my audition, and I remember playing my first tune with the band there, and one of my pads fell out my saxophone, like the D key I was playing, and the pad just fell out on the floor, you know. So like, I was like, sorry,
kids.
Anybody got any sellotape? And so they gave me some sellotape, and I sellotaped it back in and continued the audition, because they want to find out about you. So they want to find out if you're musical, if you can improvise, if you can read, and if you have a good sound. And they give you numbers for each of those elements, and then you use those numbers to get into the band. So if you want to be in the avant-garde ensemble with George Garzone, you need to have 7 for improvisation and 0 for reading, because you don't use music, but you need to have 7 and 7, you know. So I got all 7s, and I could get into any band, I remember. And so I was in 10 bands like that. But the saxophone that I took to Berklee, it wasn't my school saxophone that I had in Wester Hills. It was a saxophone that the Princess Trust had given me. So my school and my family had applied to the Princess Trust, and they gave me £400, £500 to buy a saxophone. So that's the saxophone that I took to school over there, and it eventually got stolen, but that's another story. But the school itself is, you know, it's an amazing, inspirational place, and on the corner of each floor in the dorms above the school teaching area, you have practice rooms, and the practice rooms are open not from this time to this time. They're open 24/7, right? And this is the ideology I like. Practice anytime you want. So we would practice. First of all, you go to our classes 9 till 5. You break for something to eat, and it's 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 10 to 12. You have 3 sessions, which you had to stand in line to book. So if you had a group, you'd have, say you had a group with a trio, each of you would take a turn to stand in that line for that time. And so you play till midnight, and then after midnight, you would go and practice until 3 and 4 in the morning. And you weren't the only one. There was plenty other people practicing as well. I'm serious, it's not just you. So you know you're in a competitive environment to try and get as good as you possibly can.
How far from Boston city centre was it, or was it actually in Boston itself?
Yeah, it's in Boston. It's right across the river from Harvard, MIT,
Yeah.
and it's round the corner from the Scientology building. So you got to watch out there.
Yeah.
And downtown Boston, it's just a short walk, but you're right in the heart of it. But I never went anywhere.
I'm guessing that you had so many visiting musicians anyway that you didn't really need to go to the jazz clubs in Boston itself, or.
Oh no, we did go to the jazz clubs. That's
Yeah.
definitely one thing we did do. We went to the Willow to hear Jerry Bergonzi and my teacher George Garzone play trio and blow their brains out. That was brilliant. And then that's like once a week on a Wednesday, I think. And we'd go and see. I remember the first time I saw David Liebman. I was 16 and I was in the front row again, and I thought I'd just witnessed the devil play the saxophone. It was like so evil and dark, and Richie Byrag playing all those hybrid chords. It was the energy was just, it freaked me out. Seeing that live, and I remember seeing Pat Metheny playing a small club because at Berklee, when a big name was going to play a club, wasn't advertised because it would just be inundated. So somebody would say, Dave Holland and Jack DeJohnette and Pat Metheny is going to play at Riles tonight, and you go, okay, and you get right down there, and you see these amazing players just like preparing for an album or preparing for a tour. They just want to do a gig with like screaming students, or you go and see.
But they'd know that they were going to get the right kind of audience. They'd get a knowledgeable, articulate, and jazz educated audience to bear their stuff to.
Yeah, that's right, and we showed appreciation, not like some of the British educated audiences who just go, I think I know better.
Yeah.
There was American audiences that are like, yeah, like really. I mean, they're very different from any other audience. American audience, they could be a bit superficial, maybe a little bit obsequious in their portrayal of how good that actually was as it's going along, documenting the curvaceous contour of the solo, whereas in the UK it's like silence, I ken your father.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going to give you a big head, laddie.
They can be quite tribal as well, I think. British jazz fans. They can be quite kind of nothing after 1955.
Well, that's their loss, but yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So can I assume then, Tommy? Then it sounds like that even through Berklee, going to live gigs, to jazz gigs, was still very important. So going to listen to live music was still important.
It was the best thing. I would go down to New York during. They called it midterm, and in midterm, I didn't know this, but you get kicked out of school for a week or 2 weeks, and I didn't have anywhere to stay because nobody told me that. And I was staying in the dorms, but the dorms get closed, and I'm like, well, where am I going to go?
Oh, they actually closed the dorms, do they?
Yeah, so they closed the dorms. So I'd talk to some of my friends. I'd say, well, what do you think I should do? And so you get lots of offers. You can come and stay with me, or you can go there. So I had one friend, this big black guy, alto player, guy called Aaron Spencer. We used to hang out and play jam sessions. He said, why don't you come to New York? My dad lives above a jazz club. And I went, fantastic.
Wow.
So we got on the bus, this Greyhound bus, paid, a few dollars, and took an overnighter, so it was really cheap, and ended up in New York in the morning and went to his dad's studio flat. And his dad lived way down, I think, on 4th or 5th Street or Canal Street or somewhere like that. And we got there, and I'd never been to New York, so I was 16. I was still 16, and I was looking up at these buildings.
That is incredible.
Get a creak in my neck because it was just, I was like, wow. And it was quite quiet at that time in the morning. There was like hardly anybody around. It's quite eerie. It's like a zombie nation or something. And so Aaron presses the buzzer, and the door opens, and we go up to the first flight, and I see there's a jazz club underneath. So there's the blacked out windows, and there's a jazz. I said, jazz, yes. His dad lives above a jazz club. So we went in there, up the stairs, and then there was a big metal door with like chains on the outside and some holes. And the holes are actually bullet holes. And the guy, his dad used one of the bullet holes to, peer through, and then he opened the door. And his dad was even bigger than Aaron, a guy called Spencer. He had completely bald, no hair, big black guy, quite scary looking. And I went in, and it was just one big room. And I remember on the right side there was like two big windows, a wooden floor, like racks of clothes on racks like you see in a store, and instruments lying all over the place, piano, saxophone, cases here. And then on the left there was like this big long table, and the table had bags of stuff, and there was a young woman there like measuring this white powder with a razor blade into envelopes. And there was a big bag of green stuff. There was like pills and all sorts of stuff. And the phone was going all the time. And it was like, "Hey, Spence, man, I need a fix. Can I come?" And I was like, suddenly it dawned on me that this guy was a drug dealer, like pretty, intense one. And so my friend's father basically just said, "Help yourself. Take what you like." And because of the way I grew up, I didn't do anything. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. Never tried a cigarette. Never had a girlfriend. It's all music. And so I went, "No thanks, but can I have a shirt, please?" So I took a shirt, and so I had to live in this place for a week, sleeping on the floor with my coat. Now, of course, I was used to sleeping with my coat, but not on a hard wooden floor. But anyway, these musicians started to appear. One of them was Jaco Pastorius, and he would basically come up every day, play the piano, carried his word of mouth big band music in a carrier bag.
Wow.
Got talking with him, became quite friends, talked about Glasgow, and he always shook your hand like a Cherokee Indian, and it was a very nice guy, I thought. Of course, he was getting drugs from my friend's dad, but he invited me to play, probably just because I was friends with his dealer. But I got to play the Blue Note with Jaco Pastorius, playing Donna Lee and Dolphin Dance and Mercy, 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 and we got to play 7th Avenue South. And like typical movie thing. So there'd be a big line out the door, and I'd go with my friend and his dad, and we'd go up to the very front of the queue, and we'd get the front table, like in the movies,
like a scene from Goodfellas.
Yep. And then we get to play with the band, and I have tapes of this as well. I've got tapes of me playing really bad with Jaco, and Kenwood Dinar. Another gig was with Rashi Ali, the drummer that played with Train.
They say in life sometimes, "Oh, I was too young to appreciate it." Were you too young to appreciate what was going on? Or did you understand?
I was scared to be there. I mean, I was looking out the window quite often thinking the place was going to get raided. I mean, I was totally aware what was going on here. And at nighttime, when the club was open downstairs, and there'd be just people jamming. I mean, it was really the height of musicians out of their minds. There'd be a lot of wheeling and dealing. The smell of cannabis was all over the shop, and I thought it was quite scary. And Mike Stern lived the floor above, and he was out of it. I mean, he wasn't clean then. I mean, he's clean as a whistle now. I mean, you wouldn't. He's like a saint. He always says, I did enough to last to fill several lifetimes. And so he swims every day, doesn't do anything. But in those days, he was pretty hardcore.
Well, I suppose in early, what was this, 82, 83?
83.
83.
Yeah.
So, I mean, New York was not the New York that we know now. And it had a lot of problems, So, yeah, I can imagine that at that time it would be a bit of a for someone who hadn't even hit 20 yet.
Exactly. That's why I asked. At 16, did you really? And I mean, away from that specific incident, going to Blue Note and playing with these wonderful musicians. At 16, that's incredible. That's incredible.
But for these local musicians, playing at the Blue Note is like playing at a bar in Glasgow. It's not a big deal.
Right.
For people from the outside, like me, it's a huge deal. But for them, they're relaxed. It's just the local joint. It's not anything to be made, to be built up.
Yeah.
So,
you have the most incredible story that, and we've just.
This is only half of it, man. There's worse things than this.
Gotten to the age of 16. We are going to take you to what we call the quick fire round, and I've got to admit, it's very difficult for Chris or I to make this quick fire because we keep asking more questions.
Quick fire, okay.
We're going to give it.
I'll give you the answers in advance. Yes, no, yes, yes, no. Is that okay?
Wow.
That's like a paradiddle. Diddle, diddle.
I did not expect that answer for number 4 there. So the first question, your favourite voice, your favourite vocalist live? Well,
it has to be Jasmine Horn and Kurt Elling. So both female and male. I like those two musicians live. Outstanding. I can't give one to the other because they're representing both sexes, and we need both. So
no, fair play.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Who is your favorite musician to watch live?
Dead or alive?
Ooh, but because you've said that now, that to me, you're going to say 2 answers. So I both, please.
Both. Well, for me, the Dead is John Coltrane because I'm watching everything. I'm watching how he taps his foot, how he breathes, how he moves, his position on the microphone, his concentration. You're watching everything, and that's why I love to watch Coltrane live, because there's so much to watch. I just wish there was more footage of him so you could really study how he was on stage, because I didn't get a chance to hear him. I was born in '67 and he died in '67, so there was no way I was ever going to see him.
No.
And live, a person living, I don't know. I mean, it has to be Keith Jarrett and Wynton Marsalis and Chick Corea. I mean, he's dead now, but Gary Burton. Those people who can really inspire you. I mean, it's really difficult to pinpoint anyone. But a jazz musician would probably be, I don't know. I mean, we play lots of festivals, and what we tend to do is hear other bands play. And it's one of our favorite things to do. It's not just to play the festivals, but to check out people that we haven't heard before. Because, one of our mottos is, it's not who you know, it's who you don't know that's important. So we'll go and check out a band that no one's ever heard, and you'll check out them from the side of the stage, not from the front, so you can get to feel their synergy and their interplay. So one of the best bands before I knew them was like Wayne Krantz, the guitar player, and I went to stand at the side of the stage. And because we're artists, we can just stand and, with Steve Gadd or whoever, we can just stand and check the whole gig out from a different perspective, which is always cool. But hearing Wayne Krantz for the first time, it was like, just blew my mind, because they could change tempo without any direction. It was like completely in the music. And that was a big lesson for me. How can they do that? And it made you feel so good when it went to a new tempo. I mean, it just made you feel good. Obviously, slowing down and getting faster, those are 2 other ways of changing tempo, but not recommended.
This could possibly have 2 different answers. So, your favorite ever gig. So, favorite gig as a performer. What was the best gig that you ever played? And favorite gig that you've been to?
Favorite gig I've ever played. Hopefully it'll be my one in Lichfield Cathedral in July. Solo. That's me being the sportsman. I'm like working towards that gig.
It's
For
a
me,
difficult question. That is there one maybe that where you felt it was just the best it could be, because you know.
no, it's rather difficult. It's like saying to you guys, what's the best sex you've ever had, and tell me when that was. No, I mean it's impossible to answer because you've got so many great moments in your experience. And I'm 54 now, so I've played loads of gigs with loads of people in very great venues and very rubbish venues and in some weird venues in caves in the middle of a river. I mean, just weird things, and you remember all these aspects. But to remember the best, sometimes the worst gig is the best gig. If you listen to the recording, because the mind can be diverted because of other conditions, it actually puts you in a better focus. So it just depends. I mean, I can tell you the worst gig. No,
that was the next question.
That's the next question.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say the place I would never want to play again is like St. Ives, like a jazz club like that. It's just a horrible venue, and it gets voted the best venue. I don't see how that can be a great venue. It's a terrible venue.
What is it that makes it so, well, not your cup of tea? Well,
it's a combination between the acoustics and the way you're treated. So if you're treated like shit as an artist, then I mean you're not going to enjoy the process. My favorite venue would be just like a pub, like the Blue Lamp in Aberdeen. It's nothing special, but the audience and the vibe from the people hiring you, it's so great. You want to play. You want to play really your best. But there are some people who just they want to put you down before you've played a note, and those kind of people, they shouldn't be promoters because they don't have what it takes. And so for people like that to be voted best venue, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's a shame that. It's a shame. And people do, you get good promoters, you get good venue owners, and it makes the difference. Doesn't it? The next question genuinely is strangest gig. And
I want to know about the river playing.
I want to know about the cave.
All right.
I remember when I first got into Gary Burton's band, I was 18, and we were playing a gymnasium where they would, do boxing matches. So it was humongous, and the stairs were going like up until you couldn't see them into infinity. And Gary Burton said to me, Tommy, in this kind of place, you want to play less. You want to play less notes, because the sound travels, and you want to be clear about your statements. And I was like, okay. So I'm there playing as little as possible with big gaps, and then it comes to his solo, and he plays the same as he always does. Zillions of notes.
Well, he stitched you up.
Wait a minute, he stitched me up. Stitched me up right there.
I was just going to ask you about venues. You're talking about what makes a bad venue. What do you think? I mean, what would your favourite venue be, or what makes a good venue really good?
Well, it's the audience and the promoter. And the other stuff is icing on the cake. So the piano, is it in tune? Is it warm in the room? Is it below 10 degrees? Are you going to be playing flat? We don't ask for much. It's not like Miles Davis, a big writer asking for wine at this degrees and a mirror at this angle and this kind of thing and all that. It's pretty straightforward. So,
but do you still have the odd venue? And it, because you are so well traveled, are there still a few venues around the world that you think, if we're going on tour and I'm near, I've got to play that venue?
Well, in Oslo, if you play at Victoria, that's a plus. But in Norway, the whole system and infrastructure for improvised music is so well put together. You can do a gig in the Arctic Circle for 7 people and get paid the same money as you would to 300 people in a club in Oslo. So,
wow.
You take the effort to travel there, which takes a couple of planes and a big long ride, and then you get to someone's attic that turned into a venue, and there's like 7 people, and we always say you never know who's in the audience. So we play the same as we would play in a small theater in Oslo, but they do have a great infrastructure, and their audience is amazing. But Japan is incredible too. I mean, it's a different kind of audience, but really playing in Japan is so amazing. And all over
And what
Europe,
kind of venues do they have in Japan?
every kind. Like, so they've got a tiny little avant-garde place where they only do like way out stuff, where they've got
Yeah.
Blue Note clubs. So it's all different levels of venues depending on your stature. So I was supposed to do a big tour with Makoto Zoni last year in duo, and that got cancelled. We were playing very, very big venues like my big band did the year before. So the SNGO went to Japan, and we played 2,000 seat venues, packed auditorium. We had a Japanese actor, and it was a great experience. And the couple of years before that, I played the clubs with Harold Anderson and Makoto, and that's like another level. But still, you looked after so well and respected. I mean, of course, people can treat you well, but they don't mean it. And in Japan, you never know, but it feels sincere. It's when you get to venues and they're just like, they're assholes, and you're like, what the hell did I come all the way here for if you're just gonna, be like that? I mean, we're not trying to be. I'm never nasty to anyone. But to get that kind of, and it does happen a few times, you're like, what is, so you never play there. If I was asked to play at a venue for £1,000,000, I wouldn't do it, because I don't play for money. Never have. I don't grow up playing all over the country, sleeping on people's floors, not thinking about money and only music, to play for people who disrespect you. So,
So with that then, and it's sort of slightly off kilter, you've mentioned there that you've played 2,000, attendance venues, but also to 7 people in a Norwegian attic.
Yep.
Do you prefer having a huge audience, or would you rather see the whites of their eyes? Do you like those intimate gigs?
Obviously, being a jazz musician, you're not going to get the big audiences that often. And when you get them, they're a great experience. So, like when we played for 11,000 people in Montreal Jazz Festival, the power of that, and I was speaking French to them in their own language, the power of that is just insane. And you kind of get addicted to it, because if you embrace an audience in their own language and tell a story through the songs, they just come on board and they go nuts, and that makes the musicians play even better. So, the power of the big audience is great, but also playing in a small club with the acoustics that they have, and that energy too is great as well. But of course, being a jazz musician, you're going to get more of the small effect rather than the large effect. But some jazz musicians can't make the bold strokes that you need on a large stage in front of many, many people.
Right.
You need to really make big gestures. You've got to talk slowly. It's got to be really energetic. You're projected on screens. I mean, it's a different ballgame. You need to practice what you're going to say, just like you would when you playing the different themes and written melodies. You practice that stuff. You got to practice what you say and make it happen. You just don't go to a microphone and improvise what you're going to say in a big thing like that, because it's going to fall flat.
Listen, Tommy, I think we've got a couple of questions left, because you've been very generous with your time so far.
Thank you.
The second last question was, when all this lockdown finishes, who would you recommend we go and see live that might have gone under our radar?
Where do you live?
We are going to travel, let me tell you, Tommy.
That doesn't matter. We're in Manchester UK. And Salford, but
Manchester. Is the Band of the Wall going to come back strong, or you?
Yeah, it's been refurbed at the moment, so it's going to be opening in the autumn, and can't wait to get back in that place.
Yeah, I used to like playing there when Ian Crow was the manager. Like when I was younger, we used to play every year, and it was always a great gig to go to Swan Street and play Band on the Wall and then wait for the cash to be picked up from down beneath the stage in a very low floored, big green vault. By the way, that's where the money is, or what? And yeah, it was always good to. I mean, I think I've only played there once in a blue moon. That was with the Harold Anderson trio,
That's the one I photographed.
where I met you, Chris, and you photographed my biceps. Apparently, one of the people that worked for me said, "I didn't know you had biceps." I said, "I don't have biceps."
Wow.
Being
Chris.
photoshopped.
Oh.
No, I was kidding.
Chris, I need you to take photos of me then, Chris, if you can make me look like I got biceps.
No. If you're playing a saxophone, everything gets augmented. So your veins in your neck, your veins in your face, your muscles on your forearms, it all gets augmented. So it's kind of a different reality. You look pretty flat otherwise.
In fact, when you think about the live, that question about live, I'd like to ask you, as someone who has not grown up with jazz like Chris, and I'm only just educating myself, give me one or two live artists that you think I should go and see that would be a good, sort of education for me in catching up.
Okay. Well, I'm a big fan of seeing bands who have a good sound technician. So a lot of the Norwegian bands have an engineer who is as skillful as the players on stage, and therefore
Right.
when you go and hear them, especially if it's in a larger venue, you're going to hear a sonic balanced group and be like listening to a CD. The good engineers really mix it so well, and they tour with the bands. We've had many of these great engineers tour with us, and they're part of the band. They're the other member. Now, if you're going to hear someone at a club, like say you go to Dizzy's in New York and you play that club that overlooks Central Park. I mean, it's an amazing setting and you get treated really well and the food's good and the acoustics are cool. And the sound engineer is a house engineer. And so you're a bit worried when you go in, you're like, because you don't usually use house engineers. You have your own people there. And you go in and they're great. So that's the risk you take. And sometimes they're not. Maybe they don't mix this kind of music. Maybe they mix rock music, so all the instruments are upside down. There's like too much bass drum. But anyway, bass drum can be good depending on the music, But yeah, I would recommend any Norwegian band with a sound engineer, first of all, and most of them tour with sound engineers. So any Norwegian band, from Trygve Siam to even. Harold, my friend Harold, he's got a few new groups now. Hearing Harold solo, incredible. The sound, not only is the sound going to be great, but his sound is just incredible.
Yeah.
And so for me, the sound is really important. Although when I'm at a festival, I don't go to the PA side. I stand at the stage so I can hear just the acoustic sound and a bit of the monitor sound.
Yes.
Get that energy. Because you're a bit closer and you can see the action. But
Good advice.
yeah, most of the gigs I've seen personally have been on festivals and all at the side of the stage. I mean, I would rarely go from my house here I live in the boonies in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing here. There's no street lights. There's no gas. There's no internet like hard cable. There's no sewage. It's a one-track road. There's no pub. There's nothing. It's basically a place where you can play saxophone really loud at any time of the night. Just like
Brilliant.
Yeah.
but there's lots of great. If you don't care about the sound, there's lots of great young bands coming out of Scotland who play, exemplary. So you've got one of my students, Matt Carmichael, is a big saxophone player. He's about 7 feet tall. He's really embraced the Scottish folk tradition and put it right in the forefront of his music. So his music is very beautiful to listen to, and plus he can play the repertoire, the classic repertoire too. So he has a really good foundation.
Has he recorded?
Yeah, he's got a new record. Just give me a second. I'll just pick it up. Here,
He's got it there.
yeah. So Matt's got. This is Matt's here. It's called. Where
Matt
will
Carmichael.
rivers flow? And
Right.
so this is his debut record, and his mum did the artwork. Really nice artwork.
Yeah, I love that.
But you don't judge a record by its cover.
I must say that the title of that reminded me of. So I photographed Paul Towndrow's "Deepening the River."
Yeah, river is the word of the month.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I negotiated that title, Where Rivers Meet, for about 3 weeks with Maria Rudd, the Russian artist, and a writer, journalist, and professor from Brighton University who has written a book called Dreamin' with Open Eyes and wrote the book on Jan Garbarek called Deep Song. And he's a specialist in art and ECM music especially. And so we were trying to come up with the title. Hello, Ayla. I'm still on the interview here. Bye bye. So, what was I saying? Yeah. So it took 3 weeks to come to that decision. We went through every possible alteration of the ideas that we were going through, and I had to make an executive decision based on some of the key elements, and it ended up being something like, my mum could understand. It wasn't too, profound, and so it was Where Rivers Meet. And then Paul puts out his thing, Deepening the River. Then Matt puts out Where the River Flow. And I'm like,
brilliant.
Oh my God, this is just too much of a coincidence.
That's three different types of jazz music from Scotland that you can listen to.
There we go. That's what I'm
there
going
you
to do.
go.
And also Fergus McCready's group is really great, with his new record, Cairn. Graham Costello, another one of our students, is a really great band. All the young people, of course, have got their stuff going, but there's also a lot of old people sitting around playing too as well. But you want to talk about the younger generation. And I know the older generation don't like me talking about the younger generation. In fact, a lot of them don't like me creating a jazz school because it's created a lot of possibilities. So, but yeah, they've got to have some assistance in their career as they're beginning. There are no big contracts out there anymore where they're going to get all that marketing money funneled into them. So we help them any chance they get. Anytime I get a vote on a Scottish Jazz Award or whatever, I vote for all my students. I never would vote for myself.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
Good on you. Good on you. Well, Tommy, we've got to bring this to close with our last question, which is we ask this of everyone. It's not so much a question; it's a recommendation, and we always ask someone to finish the interview with a live track or live concert or live album. Is there a go-to that you have, a favorite live album or a favorite live track? And we always put a link on the website and on the episode so that our listeners can listen to it. You may not have one favorite. I think that's very tricky, but what one comes to mind?
Yeah, I did see this question on the list in the email from Chris, and I really at that time racked my brains, and I thought of everybody that Coltrane, live at the Vanguard, live in Paris, and I just couldn't pick one. I made one live record with Harold Anderson, and it's got that energy. I wouldn't never pick it. For me,
why wouldn't you pick that one?
Because I'm playing on it. I don't like anything I do. I've got to, it's very difficult for me to like any of that kind of stuff.
You'd have to analyze it if you put it on.
No, it's just I'd be thinking about what mouthpiece I use, what microphone was there, how we did this, because recording these days is very different from how you recorded in the past. Because in the past you used analog tape and razor blades and preamps with these kind of microphones, and the sound was much more high definition than now, where everybody's recording digitally, and the sound is automatically degraded, and then it's put through all this stuff, and it just doesn't sound as good. The quality of the sound, but it's yeah, live recording. I mean, I like all the Keith Jarrett live recordings. And he's done quite a lot. My favorite Jarrett would be one of the standards one where he starts with like Stella by Starlight, and you can tell the room's packed, or it might be him playing solo in Italy, La Scala. It just the piano sound is just so gorgeous, and he ends with Somewhere Over the Rainbow, or the record where he plays tunes that like Danny Boy and stuff, or he might be improvising on one chord for like 20 minutes. All those experiences where you're hearing somebody get in the zone and just improvise and develop ideas, as or Shakti or Trila Gurtu, or I mean, it's just because I play everything. I mean, this is just some of my CDs back here. There's like and I've got more over there, and everybody's doing stuff online. I've got my LP player there and LPs there, and you just
lots.
It's
Do you know what
it's impossible.
Your enthusiasm and love of music is infectious, Tommy.
Well, it's only 8:45. Still lots of time left in the day.
Absolutely. Listen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface, to be honest. So
Part one.
Yes. We'll get you back on.
Part one.
Good man. Thanks very much, Tommy.
Thank you so much, Tommy.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Alex.
Tommy Smith there. I feel like we only scratched the surface with that chat, so I'm sure there's mileage in a second episode. I think the main thing I take away from that interview is Tommy's drive, and from a really early age, the desire to absolutely master his instrument. And if you ever listen to his playlist on the webpage, you'll get an idea of the breadth of styles that he's branched into. In particular, have a listen to the entirety of Peter and the Wolf, which is quite recent, the collaboration with Liz Lockhead. It's fantastic, and even though Tommy mentioned that it wasn't really created with kids in mind, it's a great way to introduce young ones to jazz and to Liz's work, which is always wonderful. Just after recording the interview with Tommy, I stumbled over a bunch of photographs that I'd taken back in, I think, 1990, and they were taken at the Edinburgh Jazz Festival at an open-air concert in Princes Street Gardens. I think one of the bands was the Rebirth Brass Band, who'd come over from the States. There's a few of Humphrey Littleton, and some of, Tommy Smith. So this was about 22 years before I decided to even take up photography, so I suppose it could be classed as the first gig I ever shot. And more than that though, it must have been on a wee disposable camera, and I'd obviously thought about it a bit beforehand and bought black and white film for the occasion, because jazz. And when I got it developed, I even got it developed in a kind of sepia colour as well, because that's even more jazz, isn't it? So, and also I had a wee look through my ticket album, my Bible, and found a programme from a couple of years later when I was 16, and it was a jazz competition in Edinburgh as well. I can't remember where it was. I played in a jazz trio with a piano player called Adam and a bassist called Johnny, and I don't remember much about the day, but I do remember that I was not fantastic on the day. I think a lot of the players in the competition, the other players, were bogglingly good, and that was obviously quite intimidating. But I'd also decided to play one of the tunes on someone else's saxophone, which was, yeah, great idea, Chris, nice one. But the main reason it was quite intimidating was that Humphrey Lyttelton was the compere, and one of the judges was, yep, Tommy Smith. No pressure. Anyway, we didn't win, but I do remember that it was quite a highlight of my young life at the time. I think I was about 16. So anyway, I'll pop a few of the images on the website so you can have a wee look. Yeah, the stuff from 1990. It's not my best work, but it's not bad for a 14-year-old on a disposable. And I'll also pop a few from Tommy's last gig at Band on the Wall, which we mentioned, which I think was 2018. That's the one with Tommy's biceps. Website is gigstoriespodcast.com. And yeah, give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter at gigstoriespod. We'll both be back in a couple of weeks with our next episode, and we can all hear about Alex at Boardmasters and find out if Sam Fender actually was worth the wait. I have a feeling he was, and I think Alex may have had a little cry. Bless him. Thanks for joining us again. Spread the word, share the pod, give us a wee review if you like it, and we'll see you next time on the Gig Stories Podcast. Bye.